Hi, this is Storyteller Mitch up for another installment of the Night Walker. Alright. This will make you feel better, Joyce said. Relax now, don't fight me. I can't help it, why hasn't he called? Hold still, please. Oh, alright, Joyce, I'm sorry. Joyce had placed the unresisting Irene Trent on the chair before the vanity. She was still in her white uniform, a towel draped over her shoulder. Irene was seated before her, silver blonde hair askew as Joyce worked the skilled fingers into her flesh, massaging the strain out of her arms and shoulders. Irene was nervously casting impatient glances toward the front of the shop. He should have called by this time. He'll call, you'll see. Irene nodded when she cocked her head strangely. Do you smell smoke? Joyce sniffed for her benefit. Must be your imagination. She moved her firm fingers deep into Irene's tired muscles, drawing forth the tension, closing her eyes and just lean back. Close your eyes and just lean back now. Irene obediently did as she was told. Joyce's long, cool fingers come around her back easily, smoothly, and began a tingling massage of Irene's throat. Irene closed her eyes. It did feel good. Joyce knew her stuff. She felt the weariness, ache, and ache begin to melt away, as if it had never been. Why are you always so worried about smoke, Mrs. Trent? I suppose it reminds me of Howard. He died at a fire, you know. Imagination is a funny thing, Miss Trent. Irene sighed. The girl is somehow relaxing for all her naivety. You know how upset I've been lately. Sometimes I don't know what to believe or who to trust. The steady movement of her fingers was lulling. Try not to think about it. Just let yourself go. Irene did. She lay all the way back in the chair, her throat exposed. Joyce continued to massage her shoulders, but her right hand had reached for the towel. You're very kind, Irene murmured drowsily. Forget it. The towel came up and looped slowly about Irene's neck. Joyce was holding it with both hands now, drawing it tighter. What are you doing? Your jaw muscles are all tightened up. This will help you relax. Joyce's voice was low, unhurried, her movements sure. Towel had begun to vise about Irene's soft throat. You'll sleep well tonight. No more dreams, Mrs. Trent. Before she could add any pressure to the draw of the towel, Irene had suddenly opened her eyes. I'm not going to sleep, she said savagely. Joyce instantly drew the towel away from Irene's throat, her work interrupted. Irene was too beside herself again to have noticed something peculiar or out of the way. How can I sleep? Suppose he comes in the night. Who are you talking about? Joyce stammered, her eyes showing fright. Irene sat up, turning to her face. My husband. Mrs. Trent, you just told me your husband is dead. Irene wasn't listening now. Why doesn't Barry call? I don't know, Mrs. Trent. Please, you must get some rest. I won't, Irene took her head firmly. I can't. Joyce had placed her hands on the aching shoulders again. You must get some sleep. She took up her massage almost where she had left off. Joyce, I'm frightened. Joyce smiled. Do you want me to stay here with you? Irene brightened. Would you, Joyce, until Barry calls? Of course I will. Now promise me you'll try to rest. I'll be right here. The troubled look on Irene Trent's face refused to go away, yet there was no denying or refusing the kind offer of the bright face like Joyce's. You need some sunshine to ward off the darkness. It didn't take Irene Trent long to fall asleep. After Joyce's skillful massage, she lay down on the daybed and surrendered to a dreamy slumber. Joyce had thrown a blanket over her and taken up a position in the armchair to the door. Irene's face was serene and untroubled now. Her breathing had the slow rhythmic regularity of a well-tuned piston. Joyce had started to read Life magazine, only to discard it. Her own mind was a riot of indecision. She too was on the verge of dozing off, given away to the release of sleep. Tap, tap, tap. Joyce blinked to the full wakefulness. The dim light of the small lamp on the vanity table revealed nothing different about the room. The boss lady was still breathing the deep breaths of sleep, and no one was in the room about her. But outside, tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from beyond the curtained entrance to the room. Joyce uncurled herself from the armchair, eyes flickering with fear. She stood up, girded herself, and started for the entranceway. The tapping sound had ceased. Joyce strained to listen now. It was eerie. No noise now, not even a sound from the street outside. Had she imagined the taps? Had she been half asleep, half awake, and had a dream she heard something? Her head began to fill with a variety of answers, none of them satisfactory. She approached the curtain. If someone had managed to enter the shop as locked as it was, she hesitated. Raw fear was hammering at her insides now. She reached for the alcove curtain. It shot open on its row of hoops. Like a streak of lightning, the curtain rustled across her line of vision, piling up on itself to the far side of the entrance, and she hadn't touched it. Joyce didn't scream. She couldn't. There was a figure confronting her, tall, awesome, dressed in black, an unrelieved darkness shockingly offset by the pale blur of twisted, scarred white face. Two milky, dead, pupilless eyes stared at her with nearly phosphorescent brilliance. It was the face of a dead man, horribly close, horribly near. Joyce's mouth opened soundlessly and her eyes bulged. Her face was a mask of frantic fear and enormous disbelief. Too late, she turned to flee, to run from the terrible specter standing before her. Too late, she managed one piercing cry for help scream. There was a flashing gleam of metal, and a gurgle hardly human from the terrified girl. In the brief meeting of their bodies, Joyce and the scarred monster in the doorway merged as one shadow, and then Joyce fell forward with a dying gasp. Okay, I guess she wasn't in on it. Her body hit the floor and rolled crazily like a thrown-away doll. Irene Trent bolted upright in bed, screaming. Ugh, I'm like butchering this today. Irene Trent bolted upright in bed, screaming, the ugly sight of Joyce's dead body on the rug of her room, driving away every last vestige of her self-control. It was a nightmare. The quiet shop, the parted curtains, not a sound from the interior. The dead Joyce staining on the floor with her blood. Irene had backed away from the corpse, of her own hands sticky and wet with red blood, her mind too dazed to think. She had trembled at the alcove curtain, peering into the dead quiet of the shop, seeing only the gloom and the shrouded counters and the darkness. She could not run, she could not hide. And Joyce had been struck down by the madman who was dogging her. The telephone, she had crept in the darkness, almost on all fours, to the phone of the cash register up front. But it was no use, there was no dial tone, and she had found two halves of the wiring as evidence that someone had cut the line. She was alone, trapped in the darkness, perhaps with a mad killer, perhaps with crazy, demented Howard who didn't know what he was doing anymore. Poor Joyce, a victim. Hurtling frantically to the front door, hysteria rampant within her, she had done nothing but hasten her oncoming collapse. Howard wanted to be alone with her, and he would torture her until... The door was unlocked. Miraculously, she charged through, her lungs bursting, into the arms of Barry Moreland. Barry! Arlene, what is it? Joyce, she's dead. He held her in his arms. She burrowed into him, feeling the solidity of his male shoulders, even above the beyond the nightmare. He led her back into the shop, closing the door. He looked at her questioningly. He knew when to talk and when not to. In my back room, Irene said faintly, getting her lungs back. She crumpled to the floor in the half-sitting position, dazed, her head spinning. The dark corners of the shop mocked her with the unanswered question. Why, Howard? What did I ever do to you to deserve this? Barry came back through the shop, a sober expression on his face. He reached for the phone by the cash register. He looked shocked. It's no use, Irene moaned. The wire's cut. Irene? Barry said grimly in the silence of the shop. You were right. About what? Howard is alive. She gasped and she continued. He tried to kill me earlier in the house. Oh, Barry. I know now that you weren't imagining things or dreaming them. Barry, he must be mad. You wait here. Keep the door locked. Nobody can bother you now. I have the answer to all this, and I'm going to end it now. She was terrified. She looked like he was about to leave her again. Where are you going? We must have gone back to the house. I've got to find him before it's too late. Take me with you. Her nails dug into his arm. She blocked his exit from the front door. Her breathing was fierce and rasping. He hesitated, about to shake his head in the negative. Please, I can't stay here, not with Joyce in the back like that. Oh, Barry, please, I'd go out of my mind. He came back to a quick decision. He nodded, took her arm, and moved her through the doorway. His arm hugged her briefly. All right, he said, but remember, this is my party. Eagerly, she allowed him to propel her toward his car, parked directly in front of Irene's. The clock in the car dashboard said 10:50. Barry was grim and preoccupied. Irene stared straight ahead. The high loom of the Trent house seen through the windshield was as discomforting as ever, a gloomy pile of bad memories. Barry cut the motor. He placed the car a few feet from the isolated glassed-in phone booth on the sidewalk opposite to the house. The deserted parking area was free so much as a stray cat. It had always been a quiet neighborhood, Irene reflected. Barry pointed to the booth. You can call from here. Ask the police to send a squad car right away. Aren't you coming with me? He shook his head. She had never seen him look so grim. There isn't time. Howard is moving fast now. We have to, too. She put her hand on his arm. You can't go in here alone, Barry. Don't worry, I have company. She didn't know what he meant until he reached across her to the glove compartment of the car. He held up a long, smooth .38 caliber automatic. Irene winced fearfully, but he reassured her with a smile. Better hurry. The phone. He got out of the other side of the car and walked stiffly toward the house, turning his coat collar up. Irene watched him go for a second, mesmerized by the strangeness of the situation. Then she got a hold of herself and eased out of the car on the street side. It was time to do as Barry said. He knew what he was doing, even if he didn't. And she had to call the police right away. No matter what happened in the house, she entered the phone booth quickly. Flinging a glance back at the house, Barry was out of sight now, obscured by the high row of edges which closed off the walk, running around the front of the house. She extracted a coin from her purse. The booth was hot, close, almost airless, like something which had died in the sun years ago. She took off a clammy feeling of dread and deposited the coin, lifting the receiver with her left hand. She dialed the operator. She waited, and there was no dial tone. Frowning, she dialed the operator again. She waited for the answering signal. Not a whisper of sound trickled from the receiver. It was as if the electric current was as lifeless as the atmosphere of the booth. Worried now, Irene jiggled the receiver hook up and down. Still no answering call. Slowly, she gazed down at the receiver in her hand, a sudden realization catching shift hold in her mind. The frayed ends of the dangling wire were all the confirmation she needed to know. This phone, too, had been cut. The maniac was moving fast, one jump ahead of everybody. She was debating just what to do now. She was debating just what to do, now that a call to the police was impossible. When the house made up her mind for her, the stillness of the night exploded in one short staccato burst of sound. Gunfire! Startled, Irene's eyes flung themselves at the house across the street. It was dark, deserted, and silent again. But Barry Moreland had marched in there no more than 5 minutes ago, and the sound of the shot had come from no other place. She struggled out of the phone booth, biting her lips to hold back the building dread. She stumbled on her high heels, cutting across the lane to the house. A dark cloud passed over the full moon overhead, sending her feelings of terror soaring. In her mind, she could still hear the echo of that shot, and sounded clearly, loudly in her brain. But it was only an echo, wasn't it? But it came from somewhere near the front hallway of the Trent house. Okay, that's it for this episode. Ciao.